What's up, everybody? This is Mike Whitmire, co-founder, CEO of Flowcast, inactive CPA. Welcome to our podcast, Blood, Sweat, and Balance Sheets. For today, we have our excellent guest, Gary Swart. Gary's a board member of Flowcast. I've known him for last 7 years or so. So, Gary, would love to hop right into it. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mike. Really happy to be here. My name is Gary Swart, as Mike said. I'm a partner at Polaris Partners. Polaris is a venture capital firm located in Boston, New York, and San Francisco. We invest in both healthcare and technology companies. And on the tech side, it's mostly B2B SaaS. We look for category leaders such as Flowcast, LogMeIn, WordPress, companies of that ilk. And then on the healthcare side, it's everything from CRISPR, company Editas Medicine, which has the patent on CRISPR, to dry shampoos and everything in between. Prior to Polaris, I come from the operating side. Most recently, I was the CEO of a marketplace company called Odesk. We merged with our number one competitor by the name of Elance to create Upwork, now a publicly traded company trading at about $2.5 billion. And prior to that, I had a little startup called IntelliBank, where I was a co-founder and COO. And before that, I was at a little company called IBM. And I got to IBM through the acquisition of Rational Software, where I was on the sales side. And prior to Rational, I was at Pure Software, which ultimately was acquired by Rational. So, Mike, I went from employee number 25 at Pure to employee number 131,000 at IBM before I get back to my startup route.
That's quite so if I want to get acquired twice, I bring Gary on board, and then that's how it goes.
I think they call that a double. Well, actually, most of the smart people left after the first acquisition, but and we could talk more about that, but it was a phenomenal experience. I like to say jungle, dirt road, highway, and I was there for the whole thing.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a lot over the years at Flowcast. And I was thinking for today, since you have such a stellar background in sales and then coming up as an executive, we could focus kind of on that side of the organization. And for those who don't know, when I started the Flowcast, I was an accountant, had never sold anything in my entire life. So it was a lot of just trying to figure out how to do this stuff. And Gary helped me out a lot along the way. So I was thinking, for today, we're going to focus on B2B software sales for sure. That's what we're going to really hammer on. And let's just take it from the top. Like, Gary, when you're looking at just hiring out a team, what are some of the fundamental roles you hire for? Let's just start with defining titles and what these people actually do every day.
Well, I want to answer that question, but first I want to comment on your introduction to this topic and say, don't sell yourself short. One of the things that we liked about Flowcast was that there were accountants that were actually selling it. Yep. And I went down to visit Mike in his founding headquarters, which is a story for another day. But I sat on the phone and listened to an accountant take about an hour to demo and explain Flowcast. And I think you had 50 or 60 customers at the time, small check sizes. But I said, oh my gosh, if these accountants can sell this, there's tremendous untapped potential here. And so don't sell yourself short. I think that you really nailed product market fit, which is the first step before you build out a sales organization. Yeah. Somebody told me once, never hire somebody else to do your selling for you. So in the early days, Mike, as the CEO and you and your co-founders, if you couldn't sell it, nobody could.
Exactly.
And a big mistake that founders make is they go out and hire not even a salesperson, but a sales force too early before they really have product market fit. And then after 9 months, you don't know if it's the people you hired or your product, but you're going to assume it's the people you hired.
Yeah, for sure.
And the worst part about all of that is not that you're burning valuable cash, it's that you're wasting your time.
Yeah. And so what do you look for product market fit? What are some signs for you that it is ready to hire somebody who is not the founder to sell this thing?
Well, I like to say you're juggling and, you can juggle 2 balls and then you can juggle 3 and maybe 4. And then somebody adds a 5th ball to the mix and you start dropping it. It's when you start dropping balls.
Okay.
Right. And so you're selling, you have a couple of customers, then you have another, and now all of a sudden somebody is too overwhelmed that they can't get to everything. That's the time to hire.
Okay, so there's a demand gen component to it as well as having that market fit.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's pull, not push. It's like you've established, it doesn't have to be fully baked, but I like to say a repeatable use case.
Okay.
You have some semblance of a repeatable use case. Things start to look different. Or the same rather, as you're adding customers. It's like, wow, I'm getting pattern recognition here. I'm speaking to the same person. I'm saying the same things and they're buying it. And I mentioned my company IntelliBank after IBM. The problem we had in IntelliBank was we had 60 customers, but we had 52 different flavors.
Ooh, yeah, that's tough.
And so we didn't have product market fit. So every time you went into a sales scenario, it was a little bit of, what problem do you have? Oh, we can fix that. Not this is what we do. And that declaring your major, this is what we do, is really important to product market fit.
It's really, I didn't process it in real time. I think to pat ourselves on the back, we were pretty good about that. We really zeroed in on what's our ideal target, both from a company size and from a buyer persona perspective. Looking at the controller specifically, do they have a background in audit? That was really appealing for us. And then, yeah, it was the same conversation we'd have pretty much over and over again. Same pain points. Yeah, we solve it this way. Okay, we kind of naturally got there without me knowing what product market fit actually meant. So
the nice thing about it, though, is because you were a domain expert, you came from that world, you knew what problem to solve in what priority order. And you didn't try and do it all at the beginning. As your good friends at Zoom say, own your hill. And the hill you owned was narrow in scope, but it was pretty valuable. And then you've added functionality since then, so you can own more of the stack.
And for us, we've done that based on the market and customer feedback. So we just sort of always have product market fit. If you gather that feedback from enough people and it applies to a sizable percentage of your client base, it's going to appeal to the market as well. And that served us really well along the way.
Right. But it does require, in addition to knowledge and listening to your customers, you do have to make decisions, because some customers think they know what they want. And they'll ask you for stuff that they either A, won't pay for, or B, don't actually, they'd like to have it, but they don't actually need it. And so they're not willing to pay for it.
I've noticed this, the buyer can be conditioned by the market to expect something, even if they don't truly understand whether it's valuable to them or not. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. And, a lot of my lessons learned came from Netflix, where I never worked, but I used to work with the co-founders. And so and they were mentors of mine. And so I've learned a lot of lessons. And Reed told me a story once that customers were begging for fractional stars. So I don't want to rate a movie 5 stars or 4 stars. I want to rate it 4.8 stars. You've got to give us fractional stars.
Okay.
And they begged for it. So finally they added it and nobody used it. So
right.
It didn't actually make any difference.
And nobody canceled Netflix because they couldn't do fractional stars, right? I can't imagine.
And it didn't move any of their metrics. It didn't increase movies in queue or length of subscription or so. If you're not, you have to focus on, what's important for your customers, like Net Promoter Score, for example. If it's going to move Net Promoter Score, great. But anyway, I didn't even answer your sales question. We got off on it.
No, and I mean, this is great. Like, as I reflect on Flowcast, I would say our story with product market fit, we had built a first version of the product. We scrapped that entire thing. We redid it. We were building the second version. While we were building it, I was sort of selling a mock-up and a dream in the background. And then we had the early version of it come out. And by that point, we had maybe 7 or 8 customers using Flowcast. And I had enough conviction behind the idea and the product we had built that I got to hiring. And we hired a BDR and an account executive for starters. So let's talk about that. What is a BDR and what is an account executive?
Well, BDR stands for business development rep. And typically they're outbound or they can be inbound. And they're the first line of defense or offense, if you will, on a lead. And so many organizations use marketing to create demand generation. And then rather than send it right to a sales rep, they'll send it to a business development rep. And the reason you would do that is one, for leverage. You want to have your people best leverage. What I mean by that is best and highest use of that asset.
Yeah.
And so if you're paying a sales rep to close business or to advance sales, but you're also paying them to fill the top of the funnel with leads, that can be an expensive lead generation mechanism. And it's one where I've always struggled with it because I love the leverage from a BDR, but you also have to think that is typically your lowest experience and maybe even lowest cost resource, but they're the first point of contact with your customer.
Yep. It's quite the contrast. Mm-hmm.
It's a contrast. You have one chance to make a great first impression. And do you want to empower that to your least experienced and lowest cost resource? And so you really have to decide, should you have a BDR? Should you have a sales rep? Well, it depends on what you're selling and how you're selling and who you're selling to. And so a lot of parameters go into deciding what resources you need.
And there are definitely different schools of thought on this. There are a lot of sales orgs where you're an account executive, you source your own business, you close your own business. What is it? You eat what you kill is that's how your quota works. And then in this BDR to AE model, I view it as more of like an assembly line, kind of a factory mentality. Person books the demo, gets handed off to the account executive, they close it. And to leverage, what Gary means by leverage is they're way cheaper. So you might as well put them on booking a demo instead of closing a deal, which is a very difficult thing to do. There's a lot of skills that go into actually closing a deal.
And I don't like to use the word cheaper, Mike. I like to say they're more cost effective.
There we go.
You don't want to discount the role because it's a really, really important role. And if you think about, what's in a sales process? Well, you're sourcing, you're looking for somebody who potentially could use your product. You're identifying need.
Yep.
Then you're demonstrating capability. Then you're differentiating amongst competing options. Then you're proposing, negotiating, closing, and implementing.
It's a lot.
And then if you implement successfully, you get to sell again, sell more, right?
Right.
And there's the cross sell, which is something else. You bought product A, now you'll buy product B. And there's the upsell, you bought product A. How about more of product A for more people in the organization?
Yeah.
And so it's a lot for one person to do. And so that assembly line, I think, is a great analogy of how are you going to divide those functions such that you get best and highest use out of each role in the line.
Most cost-effective way to close a deal and then generate more revenue from that deal on the back end as well.
Yeah. Funny story, though, that I thought of very quickly is you said, I was interviewing an enterprise sales rep once, and it was kill what you eat. It was like you had to source your own business.
Yeah.
And he said, look, he had worked at Siebel Systems. They were like the big behemoth, on-premise, old school, heavyweight, hard to implement. So a lot of customers buy it and never get it implemented.
And then Salesforce came.
And it's not dissimilar from Blackline and Flowcast, for example. But the interesting thing he said was, give me 100 leads and I'll close 90 of them. And I said, if I had 100 leads, I wouldn't need you. To source their own business.
Yeah, totally true. So, okay. The disconnect of the first point of contact is super important, and then that's your most cost-effective employee. That's a big challenge. How do you get over that? Like, how do you get over that hurdle?
Well, I think it's you had asked me this in the about 15 minutes ago. You said, what do I look for when building a sales organization? And first and foremost, I think it's really important to get the right personal characteristics.
Yeah.
Those are things that you can't teach. Somebody has them or they don't. And people that make good BDRs are typically hardworking. Maybe they were athletes in a former life. They're great listeners. They're inquisitive, right? So they're curious.
Yeah.
They're creative. They're hardworking because it is a volume game. It's about frequency and competency. You're a numbers guy. Frequency and competency equals revenue. If you make a lot of dials to talk to a lot of people and you know what you're talking about, the dollars will follow.
When I look back when we were in the office, when I could look over at the BDR organization, you can tell who's grinding and who's kind of not. And there's a direct correlation to the numbers that end up coming out of it for sure. I could not agree more.
But it's got to be the competency too. You can't just have 1,000 dials and they're all no's, right?
Right. Yeah. No, it's definitely, and at the end of the day, we judge based on how much ARR got closed through that BDR. So they are aligned with the ultimate mission of the company or of the sales organization, which is to book revenue. But yeah, you're right. Like, so you just named, you have to be hardworking, a good listener, you have to be really smart to be good at this job. And it's a job that's really hard. You get rejected so much. I mean, I don't know, you make 100 dials, you might get 5 people who actually pick up the phone and then maybe 1 agrees to a demo. It's just a tough job. And one thing I've noticed is like burnout in that role is very common. So what are you have any tips around handling burnout for an inside salesperson?
Well, a lot of times, it's a personal characteristic, right? You miss something coming in. And so if you ask yourself, what are the characteristics of people that burn out? Is there something different Is there something they have or don't have that your superstars have? And so that's
Yeah,
the first thing. The second is the motivation. It's, what do they want to do? What do they want to be when they grow up? What do they want to do later in life? And what career do they want to have? And then it's the skill and the knowledge. And what I found is that, and I'm sure you'll say the same thing at Flowcast, but good BDRs are going to move, and they're probably going to move pretty quickly. And
yep.
so I don't know what job you can advance up the pay scale faster than from BDR to account executive to, if you have further rungs on the ladder. But it's a very much a paper for performance job. If you do it well, it's a meritocracy. You're going to get an opportunity to advance pretty quickly and make more money. And so finding people that have that, they won't burn out. Some people may, and they may say, oh, I've been a BDR here for 4 months and I can go down the street and get a sales rep job. Most of those people will be back.
Right. I'm more talking like 18 months is around, you're slamming phones for 18 months. Maybe that's when it starts to wear on you. And yeah, we've seen almost every BDR wants to be, one day I want to be a VP of sales. And so it's BDR to account executive is the traditional path there. One thing I've noticed is closing business is very, very different than sourcing business. And the account executive in our world is responsible for closing business. So let's talk about like maybe that transition from BDR where you're operating a certain way and there's certain skills that you need. How does that change as you move into a closer role?
Well, I think a lot of the same personal characteristics apply. If you're a good BDR, you see it many times. It's often pull rather than push. They're not asking to be a sales rep. You're tapping on the shoulder saying, hey, we need you to fill a gap. Because you'd rather hire from within than outside if you could, right? You'd take a bet on an up and comer. And so I like a teaming approach where you sort of, in medical school, they have this thing, watch one, do one, teach one. You watch an open heart surgery, you do an open heart surgery, and then you teach somebody else. And when you pair a BDR with an AE, and the BDR can start to handle some of the smaller customers, the smaller deals, that maybe a subset of the products, and they can start to go through the motions, then you get some idea as to whether or not they can do the job. And when I was a BDR, I started as a BDR, and I was on a team with 2 AEs. And we had a new product that wasn't selling. And so they basically had like a contest. They said, okay, BDRs in my world were called sales associates. That was the name 20 years ago. But they said sales associates can sell this one product. And Mike, I sold the hell out of the product. I told people that we only sold packs of 20 and I would only sell 20 seats at a time. And I was getting my AEs to bundle it in because I was getting credit for everything.
Okay.
And so I would tee up these deals, and I sold one 500 seat deal of this product. And so by the time it came, by the time it was somebody was up for a promotion to AE, I was the obvious choice because I'd already done the job. So I always say, do the job before you get the job.
So for everyone listening, just remember that, do the job to get the job. It's so, so important. Mm-hmm.
So as a BDR, what more could you do to make your AE and your company successful?
Yeah, like I'm looking at a recent promotion we had, and she was so killer that she overloaded her territory with demos to where the AEs couldn't handle it. So she was able to start running some of them because she did so much good work. And now she's an AE and she's closing a ton of business.
Right. So a good AE in an organization not only will hit their quota numbers, but they'll develop their territory to the point where the territory can be split. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing, right?
Yeah. Can you dig into this more? Because it's counterintuitive, and the teaming model, I just want to tell everyone, the teaming model is amazing. We resisted it for way too long. Gary, it's in place, and it's amazing at Flowcast right now. So tell me more about how, congratulations, you did a great job. We're taking away your territory.
It's not really we're taking away your territory. It's congratulations, you've done a great job, and we're going to give you an opportunity to focus on more. And most of the time, we're also giving you more products to sell.
Right.
And we're going to give you more tools, right? You're adding functionality all the time. You're making them more efficient. And what we sometimes would do is training wheels. We'd say, okay, this BDR for the next quarter is going to be riding shotgun with you. and you're going to get paid on everything they book. And then we're going to off-road them onto a little patch of your territory, and you're going to keep most of it. And we're going to give you a new BDR.
Right.
So we're going to re-resource you, and we're going to carve off a little piece. But in the meantime, we're going to make sure you get paid on anything that BDR books as well. And what more motivation do you need than leverage? Like now all of a sudden I have another seller and I'm going to get paid. I'm going to make sure you can sell at least as much as I can, hopefully more.
And overall, your territory is still the same. It's a subset has been carved out and handed to that all-star that you have that's come up.
That's come up. And it's probably been your teammate who you're happy about.
Yeah,
right?
Always.
You want to see them. And don't forget, at the end of the day, most sales people and employees are also owners of the company. And so they want to see the company succeed as well.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot you can do here, but I've worked in very large sales organizations. I've had hundreds of reps where we had to split territories, and you get people that will sandbag, they'll hold over business, they'll make less money this year so they can close a big deal in the first quarter. You know what I mean? Like so much gamesmanship, and management knows that. Like we used to have to rank 110 sales reps in my organization. And the top 2 reps, the top 2 sellers, we couldn't rank in the 110. We had to rank 108 and put those 2 off to the side onto an island. And because they would crush their quota, but they weren't good corporate citizens. They didn't develop their territories. Okay. Their net promoter score wasn't as high. Their customers weren't as successful, but they were phenomenal at stuff in the channel.
Right. I mean? How do you deal with that? Like that's a tough trade-off because some of the best salespeople out there are very difficult personalities.
Yeah. And some won't make good managers. And so you have to have those conversations saying, listen, you're phenomenal at hitting the numbers. Where you're not is territory growth and development, team contribution, and business basics.
Yeah.
These areas, and we're ranking you and promoting you and giving you more opportunity in the organization based on these. And so you're going to end up in a cul-de-sac unless these things get fixed. And in both instances, both of those individuals came to me when I had an open district manager position, which was managing these teams, managing 5 AEs plus a giant territory, plus BDRs, SAs, everything. Both of them wanted the Bay Area job. And I had to look them in the eye and say, you're not even in consideration. Right. Like I told you, I've been telling you this for months. Like you're not, and you know the reasons why.
And how they respond?
Not well, and ultimately both left. And I rehired one later on when I needed somebody just to hit numbers. But it was career limiting to not be a more well-rounded contributor.
Yeah, and maybe we can keep going through the career path here, and the transition from closer in the AE role to sales manager is another one I found fascinating. And I think everyone assumes they just want to get promoted and become a manager one day. It's not really all it's cracked up to be. Like I hate to burst everyone's bubble who wants to be a manager at some point. It's like not the best role in the world. There are a lot of annoying things you have to deal with. So I guess let's talk about personal characteristics. Like what do you think makes a good manager that isn't necessarily all that intuitive versus what an account executive does?
Oh, well, maybe I'll just tell a quick story about how I was a seller. I was BDR, then I got promoted to account executive. We called them AEs. And I was the rookie of the year as BDR. Then I was the number 1 sales rep my first year being a sales rep, which means it overachieved quota by the largest. You
crushed everyone. You had no ramp.
I crushed everyone. And then my second year, I was the number 1 sales rep again. And I was friendly with almost all of my peers. There were some that were too competitive. I had to,
it's a fine line, right?
It's a fine line. But I friendly, and I'm still friendly with all of the people I worked with at Pure Software. This was a company called Pure Software. And the CEO of Pure came into my cube and invited me into his office and said, hey, we want you to take over. We want to make you a manager. And I said, oh, and the CEO was a guy by the name of Reed Hastings. Reed started this little company called Pure Software, and then he helped start another company, they DVDs via the mail. It's called Netflix. They do
It's
like movies. Yeah.
done
And so,
well. Yeah.
So Reed said, we want to make you a manager. And I remember saying, Reed, why would I want to be a manager? Like, I'm the number one sales rep making money. Like, why? And he goes, because we need you to teach everybody to do what you can do. We need you to get everybody doing what you can do.
Yep.
And it took about, I don't know, it took probably 3 or 4 weeks for me to say, yeah, okay, I'll take the manager job. Like, they had to beg me. HR had to ask, the head of sales had to ask, everybody had to like convince me to not be a seller and do this manager job.
It's so interesting. I rarely see that mentality. Everyone just wants to go to the, I think if I threw that out at anyone, they would say, yep, totally, tomorrow.
So my number one piece of guidance for the sales rep that wants to be the manager, that wants to be the VP, is just do your very best work. Do the very best job you can. And most times it'll be pull, not push.
Right.
I've always had the mentality that you want somebody tapping you on the shoulder saying, we want you to do this job. And throughout my whole career, I'm always the one that says, you want me to do that job? Like, really?
Yeah.
Like, the same thing happened when I was a manager at Pure, and Reed called me in and said, we want to make you a director. And he had a 5-page document as to what a director was. And there were only 5 directors in the whole company. Like, they were really stingy with titles. And he had a document that said, here's what a director does. And here's why we want you to be a director. And so I like to be in a position where somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, we want to give you more responsibility.
That is one of the best things I can hear in an interview, by the way. Just when I'm interviewing candidates for any position, if I hear, then the CEO asked me to do this, then this, whenever I hear they asked me to do something, just the light bulb goes off, because it's like they're going to be great. If the CEO's asked them to do 2 or 3 different random things at the company or just move up, yeah, it's a great sign. So that's great advice.
Yeah. So that's first and foremost. And then you were asking what makes a good manager. And so when I finally I agreed to do it, I'm now the manager. I fired 3 people in the first week. And then I was in Patty McCord's office. Patty went on to be the chief people officer at Netflix. She wrote a great book. That whole Netflix culture deck, if you haven't seen it, is fantastic. Yeah. She's the architect and mastermind behind that.
Oh, okay.
And Patty called me in and said, what the hell are you doing? And I was like, listen, they're dead weight. They're never going to be. Reed said, you want me to teach people to do what I can do? These people can't do it. So get them out, get them off the train. And so the mistake I made, I think everybody has to go through some learning lessons. The mistake I made was taking Reed at his word, saying, we want you to do what you can do, which doesn't mean do it like you were doing it.
Yes.
It's
very important. Like, not everyone can deliver lines the way you deliver them. Different people have different like nuances to all of it. I mean, so I'm curious then, okay, what were you able to do or train that help people close like you, but not necessarily be like Gary Swart? There are only so many Gary Swarts out there.
Well, it took me a while. Like, I would say that when I first became a manager, my net promoter score amongst 24 reps, AEs, and BDRs was probably negative.
Well, you fire 3 in the first week. Yeah, you don't make the most friends.
One of them's husband was a lawyer who sent a very nice letter to the company, which is why I was in Patty's office. And so I think what somebody like Reed appreciated was it wasn't necessarily the right way to do it, but it was the right thing to do.
Right. And that's an unfortunate reality of sales, is there is a lot of turnover in it. And it's a difficult organization, because if you have mediocre performers, it impacts everybody, like including, so the company is less efficient. Your best reps get, fewer leads. Like, let's talk through you use the term SEAL Team 6 a lot with me. So let's talk about team structure and formation and the SEAL Team 6 concept.
I think in the context, I've certainly seen this at my companies. It's almost like you have too many reps, and you look at your distribution of attainment, which is the number of reps that are at goal or over goal versus under goal.
Yep.
And if your distribution of attainment as a percentage is low, then chances are you have too many reps.
And what number are you looking for?
Oh my gosh. In an ideal world, you'd be at 100 and you'd be adding more reps.
Yep.
But you should probably be at least at 80%, 75 at the lowest. And then it's not only the raw number, but it's the why. Right?
Yeah, because you can set low quotas and everyone's at 100%. So there's a lot more to consider in that. Mm-hmm.
Right. And who's the team and who's in a ramp and what's their territory. There are some people that have insufficient territories. Maybe you split something and your math wasn't good in the split and it wasn't enough to attain a quota. Maybe there's a product issue. There could be something going on competitively. But and so what I always say is you don't want to carry extra weight in your sales organization. I also think management loses credibility, especially in a sales organization. If you're working your ass off and you look at your peer next to you who's not and is at 40% of quota, at some point you're going to say, my boss, my VP, my manager, my CEO, this place doesn't have high standards. Like you can coast here and still have a job. And why don't I coast a little bit? Now, if you hire the right people who are motivated, they're not going to do that. But you have to worry about maintaining high standards in a sales organization because people know.
Well, mediocre people would lower themselves to that is what's the least I can do to not get fired. And then your top performers are going to look at that mediocre person in disgust. And that's when they're not as impressed with your company and your decisions on talent and all that. And yeah, that drags a team down, right? Having people who aren't as good as you around is just not a fun working environment.
But if you have a 2x2, Mike, and it's like attitude and aptitude, it's like how good are you at the job, and then how good of a citizen are you in the company?
Yeah.
Right. And the guys I mentioned earlier, their aptitude was fantastic. Right? If that's the y-axis, they were at the top of the y-axis from their ability to sell. But their attitude, sharing resources, helping out others, being over-communicative, not selling licenses into somebody else's territory, they were at the low end of the spectrum. So if it's, sinners and saints, sinner and saint is there, and not so good to really good. What's important on a SEAL team, it doesn't mean they're all in that upper right quadrant. You may have some phenomenal team players that are okay sellers, but they add an incredible dynamic to the team.
Yeah, there's definitely a cultural impact to certain team members. It's a fine line. Like I think our VP of sales, Jill, now who worked with Gary previously, has played a big role in building out our sales organization. She just has the gut for it. It feels like the right gut instinct on how much, of the good citizen will I tolerate versus intolerate for performance. And that's just something I feel like it's just years of experience to get to making the right decisions on that one.
Yeah. When I was a CEO after being, having a career in sales, I became an operator and then a CEO. And I remember I pulled one of our very best engineers. He was phenomenal. Aptitude off the charts. He was one of these 10x coders. They can write 10 times more code than the mediocre coder. But boy, was he an ass. He was so obnoxious. I mean, quick example, we had a guest come in to talk to everybody about product experience. And it was a very high ranking exec from Netflix. And he came in to talk to the company about how they did it. And it was incredibly informative. And this particular engineer was just being a heckler, like asking obnoxious questions, saying that's stupid. Nobody would do it that way. And so it was to the point where people were looking at me in the back of the room. People would look at me and give me stink eye, like, you're going to let him get away with this? And so after the meeting, I had to pull him in. It was a meeting and then happy hour. And then I had to pull him in. And I actually drew that diagram on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
It said, you're here. This is you. You're here. And this is fatal. Like, you want to become a lead architect, you want to manage people, you want more compensation, more stock. Like right now, people don't even want to work with you because you're so difficult. And so you have to fix this or there's consequences.
The brilliant jerk.
Brilliant jerk. And so he sent me a 5-page email saying, I'm not an ass, I'm not obnoxious, I'm just Russian. And nobody ever gave me this feedback. And so I was lucky enough to participate in Upwork's IPO in New York.
Yeah.
And any employee that had been there more than 10 years and was director above got to be in New York, and was in New York.
Oh, very cool.
Tear to my eye. It brought a tear to my eye that he was still there and got to participate in the IPO.
And had he moved into a leadership role from
there?
He
moved into more of a distinguished coder role. So It's almost like not necessarily managing people, but distinguished member of staff. So you become like a super coder that can teach other people. It's more of a mentor to coders, not a manager of coders.
Oh, okay.
But he did fix a lot of his flaws. They were fixable in this case.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, probably a pretty impactful conversation there, and maybe a reason he was at that IPO. That's very cool.
Yep.
So let's keep going on sales teams. What do these people do? So we've already talked about BDRs. We talked about account executives. A little bit about sales managers. Then there's this whole thing called a sales engineer. What is a sales engineer?
Sales engineer brings credibility to the whole process. And so they're typically the domain expert. So you know, in the early days, Flowcast you all had accountants who were selling.
Yep.
And that was great because they were credible. And you thought in the early days, only accountants can sell this because they're speaking to accountants. And if they're not going to be credible. Mm-hmm. And now what percentage of your sales force are accountants?
It's about, on the AE side, like 35, 40%, something like that.
40%.
Yeah.
And what you're finding is that's probably a good mix because there's osmosis in the organization. People can hear the accountant. And so the problem with sales is sometimes if somebody is too technical, like if you're selling an accounting product and you were an accountant, you're technical, you can answer all the questions, but you can't ask for the order.
Yep.
And if you're too salesy, you can ask for an order, but you don't know all the questions. You don't know the answers to all the questions. And so an SC typically fills the gap. It's someone who's technical enough that they can answer all of the technical questions. They can be let me show you how we do it. They've been down that road and they can handle all of the technical, enabling the sales rep to ask for the order. And sometimes people will say, well, I only want SCs that have been there and done that. And I only want sales reps who have that domain expertise. They have to have been an SC. And if they're too technical, they're not salesy enough. And if they're too salesy, then they're too slick.
Yeah.
And so it's good to have both roles.
Yeah, so that's ultimately how we've built out. It's a pretty low ratio of sales engineers to account executives. So we just hired our fourth, and that puts us at a 4 sales engineer to, I believe, 14 account executive ratio, which for those listening, I think a lot of companies are like 1-to-1. You have 1 sales engineer per account executive. Something that someone told me recently it was actually one of our accountants who was telling me about how much he likes sales engineers. I was like, why? You don't need one. You get this stuff. You're an accountant. He goes, well, if they're doing all of it, it allows me to listen more. And I can hear more of the questions and I can listen and come up with better ways to, either ask next level questions or actually answer the question in the best way possible. And this is something I think is really important. So let's tell the audience about how listening is way more important for an account executive than talking really is. Because that's something that is missed. Like, just tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, there's a guy by the name of Neil Rackham that's written books on it. And he observed thousands of sales calls, something like 30 or 40,000 sales calls, and looked at the data. And his data showed that in successful sales, the rep listened 80% more than talked. And in unsuccessful, they talked more. And so it's a great, you don't have to read the book. That's the premise of it. But they looked at the behavior of those reps and they asked many more questions And that's why sometimes newer salespeople are like you said, look, I don't know how to sell anything, but you were able to sell your product because you had to ask questions. You
Yeah.
didn't know, you didn't know what to say. And I have so many stories around this, but one in particular around the SE role was we had a very large deal with Bank of America once, and we were over in Concord, California. And I was there with Mark, who was I was running the Western region and Mark was running the Western region for all of our SEs. We had a pretty large SE organization and Mark was the lead technical staff for SEs. And we went to sit down with the CIO of Bank of America. And we spent about an hour in the room. And afterwards, I left. I was going to leave. And I forget his name. But anyway, the CIO said to Mark, he goes, Mark, could you stay behind for a minute? I want to ask you a couple of questions, if you could stay behind. And I said, Mark, I'll be down in the Bank of America cafeteria. I'll meet you down there. And about 20 minutes later, Mark came down and I said, what was that all about? He said, basically, he wanted to know what he should believe of what you told him.
Oh my gosh.
So Mark was the credible inside guy. He had spent so much time at Bank of America with their technical teams, with them, with the CIO, that he was trusted. And he basically was asking Mark, hey, can I trust this guy? And I was a regional vice president. Like,
yeah, seriously.
Like, so can we trust?
Yeah, there is, it sort of sucks, but the like used car salesman concept is applied to all sales roles is what I found just sort of broadly. And that's super unfair. Like there's not the best software salespeople from what I've seen. Great listeners, don't oversell, right? They speak in their client's language and they're just personable and they have this good mix of both introvert and extrovert. You kind of have this good combination of being able to listen and then know enough to be confident to speak and deliver the right message. But with the question asking, I feel like there's a lot of psychology in that, being able to ask the right questions and just let's talk more about like actual wording and how you ask questions. Like when you're thinking about a sales process and trying to uncover pain in particular, how do you think about that stuff?
Well, I think it's really, really important, Mike. And it's a great point. It's like, if you go to your doctor and the doctor starts asking you like a million questions, how tall are you? What do you weigh? Like basic situational questions, you get really aggravated. You're like, isn't this on my chart? Like, couldn't a nurse have done this? Like, why are you wasting my time? And so, but if he starts asking you like, oh, and then let's just say you went because your neck was sore. And you said, well, my neck is sore. And he goes, Mike, say no more. I know just what you need. I'm going to write you a prescription and good to see you. We'll see you soon. You're like, you didn't even ask me any questions. How do you know what's wrong? Like, you didn't ask me how it happened, like nothing. So there's somewhere in between where it's like you have to ask good, valuable questions, not valuable for you, but valuable for your client. And so if you take this approach of, listen, there's a couple of questions I want to ask you. I don't know if we have something that can help you or not, but if you had 5 minutes, we could figure it out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So here's what I need to know. I already know what you do and how big you are and all of that. So what are your challenges around this? Now, somebody who doesn't know you or trust you is not going to tell you what's keeping them up at night.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
So it's this delicate balance of where you have to get in to get the important information in a trusted way. Somebody told me a unique story once. They said, if you go to a party and you start talking about your kids and you say, kid's unbelievable, straight A student, you should see him play baseball. He's unbelievable. Like this kid is so good. He's got an arm, like he's a good pitcher, but I play third base, and I brag. You're like, one, you don't want to hear it. And two, you're not likely to open up about your own kid because then it becomes a competition. Like you said, your kid, my kid. But if I came into a party and you said, hey, how's the family? And I said, pretty good. But let me tell you, we're struggling with our youngest. I mean, this kid has so much potential, but he's just not focused. He's not living up to it. And I'm frustrated. Then how do you feel?
Feel pretty good.
You're empathetic.
Yeah.
You feel good about yourself. It's almost like you want to help me. So you're like, I'm sorry. So if you can make yourself a little bit vulnerable, if you can show that you really care about the customer. You know what I mean? And open yourself up a little bit to say, hey, look, this is a safe environment. I'm going to ask some questions, but hey, I've been in your shoes and this happened to me. And here's what I gained out of it. Can you just get enough? So you want to be more like the second scenario than the first.
And I think you're getting into sort of taking more of a consultative approach than just telling people what they need. You're the doctor analogy. I haven't heard you make that one before. That's so spot on. Oh, your neck hurts, here, I'll give you this drug or whatever. That's such a issue that people have, especially with us at Flowcast. Like, I know what the pain points are, right? Because I've done this, I've talked to enough people. So before I hop on a discovery call with anyone, I can almost tell you what their pain points are going to be. But you still have to ask it, because I feel like it's a lot more powerful when they say it to you, right?
It absolutely is. If you say it to them, they don't believe it. If they say it to you, they believe it because they said it. And so the skill or the art is getting them to say it. It's not tricking somebody into saying it. If they don't feel it, then you don't that's fine too, because there's lots of people you can help. I'd like to end it and say, hey, thanks for your time. Or maybe there is an area where you can help. It's just not Flowcast. You can refer them to a friend, or you can get them something else. And so if people get off the phone and they feel like, wow, that was a great conversation, even though Flowcast can't help me, that's a win.
Yes. So we've been going for a while. I want to wrap on this topic because I think it's really important, and really important for accountants in particular. There's this, misunderstanding that salespeople, they sell ice to, Eskimos kind of thing. It's just they sell whatever. They just want to make it happen. And it's really way more consultative than that. It's finding a great partner. It really is trying to find someone that you can actually help with your solution. And you're so spot on. If Flowcast isn't a good fit for somebody, but we figured out, they have a problem with how to book their equity journal entries, I'd love to refer them to a partner of ours who could help them learn how to book those journal entries. And that might pay off down the road, that whole consultative notion.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's so important. It's not selling, it's finding the right company to partner with, and whether your software genuinely makes sense for them or not.
And that's the job. It's almost like it shouldn't be called selling. It should be consulting, but that has its own connotations.
Yeah.
But, you said something interesting, Mike. You said selling ice to Eskimos. And that used to be a saying back in the day, like, they could sell ice to Eskimos. But the problem with that in today's world is that Eskimos don't need ice.
Exactly.
And so if you sell ice to Eskimos, if you sell something to somebody that they don't need, what's going to happen the next time you show up to sell something? Even if it's another company, another product. And the world is just too small these days with G2 Crowd and all these things. Like, you can't afford to sell something to somebody that they don't need, and worse, that they won't use.
Yes.
Because your company, you as a rep, may be technically successful because you hit your quota and made a little bit of money. But if you come back next year and none of your customers are using the product that you sold them, well, number one, there's going to be no upsell or cross-sell. Number two, your churn rate is going to be higher than the company average.
Yep.
Number three, the company's not going to be successful if everybody sells that way, because you're going to have high churn. And then all your sales reps are going to leave. And so it's not a recipe for success. Selling something to somebody that they can't genuinely get value out of is not going to work in the long run.
I want to wrap it on that. Beautifully said. So spot on. I cannot recommend or encourage that advice enough. So yeah, let's wrap it on that. Gary, thank you so much for taking the time to teach us a little bit about sales here and building out a sales organization. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mike. I don't know if I actually answered any of your questions, but I feel like we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we got there. I mean, I wanted to go 101 type stuff here, and I think we went maybe into like 201. It got real interesting there.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you so much, man. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. See you.